Welcome to Hospitality Talk. My name is Sam Erik Ruttman. I'm with my co-host Abid Butt. How are you, Abid?
Very well, thank you, Sam. Welcome to Hospitality Talks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, whether you are on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. We're very glad that you were able to join us. Sam, thanks for connecting us all.
Yes, I mean, this is actually a very special honor because I'm based in Helsinki, and now I have a chance to discuss with one of the top leaders in the hospitality industry based in Washington, D.C. So it's a very special time, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Superb. So if it's okay, let's get started. Let me bring in Chip Rogers. Chip absolutely does not need any introduction. Been involved in the industry for a long time and been helping out all the right causes that help the owners and operators in the industry. Welcome to Hospitality Talks, Chip.
Gentlemen, it's an honor to be with you, and thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for making time to partake in this. We really appreciate it, particularly since our originally scheduled session had to be postponed because of the network outage. So we really appreciate your flexibility and really, really honored to have you on the show.
Glad to be with you.
So, Chip, if it's okay, we'll get started. Now, you took on the helm for AH&LA about a year and a half ago, if I remember correctly. Just going back, if you don't mind, towards the end of last year, what was on your hit list for 2020, and how much of that is survived because the environment has changed altogether?
Well, it does seem like a long time ago. When we talk about points of reference now, it's pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, or I guess pre-pandemic in the middle of the pandemic, since we're still in it. And it seems like a lifetime ago that I actually started with AH&LA, which was the beginning of 2019. So 2019, as you know, was a record-setting year for our industry. It was a record-setting year for AH&LA. Things were going really well. And then we hit 2020, and January looked wonderful. And then we started hearing these rumblings about things happening in China in February. And of course, now, 5.5, almost 6 months into the pandemic, we realize the impact that it has had. So to answer your question specifically, we looked at 2020 as a year of great growth opportunity for AH&LA, doing a lot more at the state and local level here in the U.S. Still, of course, focusing on the federal level, but at the federal level, interestingly enough, and you're seeing it play out now, a lot of gridlock. Sometimes gridlock can be good, sometimes gridlock is bad, but there was a lot of gridlock, and we were moving forward on our major federal issues, but a lot of activity at the state level. So we began 2020 with really a kind of a growth model of how we're going to become more engaged at the state and local level. Still working on things like illegal short-term rentals at the federal level as well. And then, of course, all of that changed in late February, early March. And since that point in time, it's been nothing but coronavirus 24/7. And so like everyone else, we're dealing with this. It has impacted our industry more than just about any other. And we certainly don't escape that at the Lodging Association. And so we're fighting through it. And we've had a lot of victories, but we need a lot more to get past this.
Well, I must thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing to keep hospitality and lodging industry front and center with the lawmakers, because whether we like it or not, it is a bit about making sure that the right causes are in front of these folks, because they've got a lot of things. They're being pulled in all different ways. So thank you for doing all that you do to make sure that our industry is not forgotten and we do actually get a seat at the table, if you would.
Yeah, our focus at any time, pandemic or not, is to promote and protect the hotel and lodging industry. And so, oftentimes we will find ourselves in somewhat of a defensive posture and trying to stop bad legislation. Many times we'll be in an offensive posture, like we've been recently with the pandemic, of trying to get legislation passed that will help the hotel and lodging industry or the travel industry in general in a larger sense. So we kind of play offense and defense as any good team would do. And we've certainly been busy, very busy since March.
So, Chip, what is the general sentiment from your members, the stakeholders that you're dealing with, whether the owners, the brand operators, small shop people? What is the general sentiment? What are they most concerned about?
That's a really good question. I think it really depends on who you are, where you are, and what the breadth of your business is. So, as you know, we represent all of the major brands, and most of these are global brands. And so they might have a different viewpoint of where we are than someone who operates only domestically. So if you're operating hotels in China, as many of our brands do, they have already seen a rebound in China, and their occupancy numbers are almost back to where they were pre-pandemic. So you might, if you're in that position, have a much different viewpoint than if you're a single hotel operator in a large urban market in the U.S. that is struggling with 20 or 25% occupancy. And our members range from the brands to the hotel owners and to the management companies. And for those domestic hotel owners, they find themselves in a position of survival in most cases. And so when we hear people talk about getting past the pandemic and how do we have a stimulus and how do we get business back to where it used to be, I mean, that's all wonderful, and we certainly hope for that, and we need that if we're ever going to survive. But right now, so many of our members that are individual hotel owners are looking around saying, I'm just trying to make it to October. And when they get to October, they're trying to make it to December. And the reason is because those cost drivers particularly on the labor side, insurance and taxes and just general business operations, I mean, those are still there at a time when your revenue has dropped in many cases by 70, 80%. So most of the industry is still in survival mode, and we're trying to help with that in many ways. I know we'll get into that. And if you're a domestic only business, you're probably more likely than not just trying to survive.
Our industry by nature is really fragmented. As you mentioned, there are brands that are involved in it. There are third-party operators. There are owners. The whole environment of different stakeholders that have a stake in this industry. Does that help the cause in moving things forward, or does it hinder us in getting things done faster?
It's a really good question. And frankly, it's something we've struggled with as an industry even prior to the pandemic. One of the things that's lost on most policymakers is the fact that our industry, the hotel industry, is much more like restaurants, and that you have decentralized ownership in a franchise model than it is like airlines. So, when we began this pandemic, the discussion was the airlines, the cruise ships, the hotels, and the restaurants, those are going to be the ones that are most hurt. And that's true. We were the first ones hurt. We've been the most hurt, and we'll be the last to recover, no question about it. But when lawmakers think about hotels, they think of those large brand names like Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt, and they mistakenly often say, well, those are large global corporations that can weather this storm, without recognizing that it's the individual owner, the franchisee, that actually owns the property. It's the franchisee that's trying to keep people on payroll. It's the franchisee that has to pay the property taxes and the security bills and the electric bills, and it's the franchisee that has to ultimately make that mortgage payment. And so part of our challenge has always been explaining that franchise model to policymakers and letting them know that in the hotel industry, more than 60%, well over 60% of hotels are classified by government definition as a small business. And it's those small business owners who need the help right now if they're going to survive. So in many ways, it makes our case more difficult because we're in kind of a decentralized small business environment. On the flip side of that, in some ways, it helps us because we have this army of people that are these small business owners who live in these members of Congress in their specific districts, and whose voices can be heard in a very magnified way if we're all working together. And that is key, all working together. And so you posed the question about the fragmentation of our industry. It is both a strength and a weakness, but when we have everyone working together with a unified voice, a succinct voice, not asking for too much, but asking for the right things in a very loud way, we can use that to our advantage.
It's very interesting that you bring that up. I think lawmakers are not alone. Look, I've been in the industry for the longest time, and even my family at times doesn't understand what the deal is. I participate in one of the neighborhood apps, And a simple thing like ordering a pizza, there was a comment on an app once saying, hey, don't order from Domino's, order from XYZ because this is a local business owner. So I had to go back and explain more than likely the Domino's guy is a franchisee and he's just as much as in trouble as anybody else. So don't think it's a big corporation, much the same way that you said. So even a fundamental thing like that is lost on general populace, but we'll continue to educate folks that these are small business owners that are trying to make a living and trying to survive in this trying times.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the programs that AH&LA has introduced. You had talked about Stay Safe, which is a cohesive voice from the industry. Help us understand, how has that helped the industry? How many brands and operators have implemented it? What are we doing to get that message across? Because as you know, in US, even the response to COVID at county level, at state level, and nationally, it is very different. Consumer doesn't know what to expect. How do we overcome that?
Well, you really hit the nail on the head with that observation. Early on, this goes all the way back to March, we knew that if we were going to get consumers back into hotels, which when you think about it, that's really the only answer. I mean, even the government action and the PPP and the emergency loans and things like that, that's only a stopgap measure. At some point, consumers have to travel again and stay in hotels if we're going to survive. So we knew that back in March, and we did a poll. We poll all the time with a group called Morning Consult. We believe they're the best in the business when it comes to polling. And we went out and we asked consumers, people who stay in hotels, what's your concern right now? What are you looking for at a hotel? Is it price? Is it location? Is it safety? Is it cleanliness? And by an overwhelming margin, the number one response was safety and cleanliness. So we knew that's what consumers were wanting. We then went to all the brands, the 17 largest brands, actually, the large ownership groups, the large management companies, folks like AH&LA, and brought them all together and said, look, can we as an industry create a set of guidelines that can be applied across the board? That means from the smallest roadside motel to the largest resort hotel. And can we create guidelines that can be applied to all, recognizing that based on certain locations, certain structure types, certain brands, they're going to go above and beyond it, but we should be able to at least create a baseline set of guidelines. We were able to do that and get everyone to agree on it. We then went to Ecolab, which of course, as you know, is perhaps the most prominent player globally when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing office buildings and hotels and commercial buildings. And we engaged with them on making sure that what we were proposing was both realistic, it was cost effective, and that it did the job. It cleaned the place and kept it safe. So we got them engaged. Then we took all those guidelines and went to the CDC here in the US, the Centers for Disease Control, and said, look, could you review these for us to make sure we're doing the right thing here? They did. They made a couple of recommendations. We made some changes. Once all that occurred, we rolled it out to the entire industry. And we're proud to say that it's been adopted almost universally across the board, not just for the brands, but also independent hotels as well. Thousands and thousands of businesses and hotels have adopted this. Recently, we came out with a second version of it, or I should say an addendum to it, which is not just the cleaning that goes on and the procedures and protocols inside the hotel, but what are the expectations of guests? And of course, these centered on making sure that you're wearing face coverings when you're in indoor public spaces, making sure that you're doing the social distancing, so that guests have a full expectation of what is going to happen inside the hotel. Now, I'll close with this on this point. This is so critical. Consumers were looking at Safe Stay and saying to themselves, okay, that's great because now I know how hotels are cleaning. What was missing, though, were many consumers who said, I don't want to go to a hotel unless I know that other guests are going to wear a mask or a face covering in the public areas. And so once we added that to it, now we've created a scenario where we have uniformity across the industry. All the brands have adopted it. And so if you're a guest looking to book a hotel, you know what to expect before you arrive. And that's going to help business. I know there's been a lot of controversy about masks, but that'll help business if we can send that uniform message so everyone understands. If I get on a plane, I'm going to wear a face covering. And if I go into a hotel, at least in the public area, I'm going to wear a face covering as well.
Yeah, I think the key, as you say, is the consistency, the expectation. I was reading one of the surveys that McKinsey recently released, And they talk about that the consumer anxiety is still at an all-time high. They don't know what to expect and whether they're going to be staying safe or not. So if the industry adopts some of the practices that you have launched, at least the bare minimum has been attended to. If they exceed that, that'll be fabulous. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for launching that. Hopefully every hotel is talking it up so that as an industry, we have a cohesive voice. That is terrific. Now let's go to government support, which is the key at this particular point in terms of keeping some of these small business owners afloat. Government in the history, as far as I could tell, was very quick in passing the bill with largest amounts to help the business owners out. For our industry, the industry that is near and dear to our heart, I'm not saying that the rest of the industries are not important, but this industry is very dear to our heart. I don't know if we got our fair share. I don't know if we got looked at the way we should have been looked at. Any thoughts on that? And where do we stand on the next stimulus money?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of points to cover here, and you raised some really good ones that I think need to be brought out so people kind of understand where we are. So as we started this process back in really early March, what lawmakers were facing at that time was a pandemic that had just come from China that was anticipated to last for a few weeks here in the U.S., and then we would be back to normal. Now, part of the reason that they had that view was that in China at that time, the news stories, let's say they weren't as accurate as they could have been. And so we had this false belief that this was going to be a short-term event. If you recall, in early March, it was just starting to hit Europe in a way that was significant. But we had no line of sight to say that this was going to be a multi-month event, or in this case, perhaps for the rest of the year. And so lawmakers proceeded forward with this idea that what business owners were going to need was about 8 to 10 weeks of kind of a bridge to get from here to there. And if you look at the CARES Act, which was the first major act that was passed, you referenced it a moment ago, the largest single spending bill that has ever been passed by any legislative body in human history, not just the U.S., but in human history, the largest bill ever. It passed in record time. It passed with universal support, Republicans and Democrats alike, House and Senate alike. The president, of course, signed it into law. And at that time, it created a number of items that were beneficial or thought to be beneficial for our industry. Now, we advocated from the beginning for the PPP. That was our big thing, is those loans that could be forgivable turned into grants. Some of the challenges we faced right out of the gate, and this is really important, and I think this is where our industry did get a lot of help, is that under the SBA, the Small Business Administration, they make loans to employers that have 500 employees or less. They don't make loans to employers above that. What we had put into the bill was a waiving of the affiliation rule, and that was so critical. And everyone watching me needs to understand why this is so important. The affiliation rule says that if any ownership group has more than 500 employees in total for all of their businesses, then they would not be eligible for an SBA loan and therefore not eligible for a PPP. So if you owned a hotel or even more than one hotel, but you also owned other businesses, and the totality of all of your employees and all of your businesses went above 500, you would be excluded from gaining access to this. We were able to get the affiliation rule waived for hotels and for restaurants specifically, so that the hotels and restaurants were going to be treated on an individual basis, an individual unit basis. So that single hotel, as long as that one hotel didn't have more than 500 employees, then they could qualify for the PPP. But what does that mean in real terms? Well, without the waiving of the affiliation rule, if the PPP had just proceeded, it would have covered somewhere between 60 and 65% of all hotels. With the waiving of the affiliation rule, that took it from 60 to 65%, all the way up to about 98 or 99%, covering just about every hotel in the U.S. The next part of that was getting some of those rules waived. If you recall at the beginning, the Treasury Department came out and said, you have to spend 75% on employees and only 25% elsewhere. We got that number knocked down to 60-40. You had to spend it in an 8-week period. We got that expanded to the end of the year. You had to spend it by June 30th. We got that expanded to the end of the year. So we got a lot more flexibility added into it. We got the terms of the loan extended if in fact it turned into a loan. So we've had a number of successes all along the way. Now moving forward, and I know this is a long answer, but it's really important. Moving forward, what we've been able to do is convince members of Congress that the next round of PPP should go only to those businesses, like hotels, that have been hurt the most. So it's not specifically for hotels, but it says that if you had a certain percentage of revenue drop compared to last year, then you would be eligible for a second round of PPP. That is what is before Congress right now. And so if we get that passed, which we're working feverishly to do, then just about every hotel in the U.S. who got a PPP loan the first time would be able to go back and get another PPP to continue to make it through this very difficult time.
So Congress is now on a break. Are things going to continue to move, or are we at a standstill for the next 30 days?
Well, it is unfortunate what has happened, because the first four or five coronavirus bills, they all passed virtually unanimously. Now we have gotten bogged down in partisanship, we kind of knew it was happening because we're getting close to an election, but it's quite unfortunate because the truth is that Democrats and Republicans seem to agree on the changes to the PPP. That doesn't seem to be a problem. There's no real opposition to that. Yet it's caught up in a larger package that deals with items like liability protection, which we absolutely support and need on the Republican side. And on the Democrat side, they are fighting for additional funding to state and local governments. And the Republicans are saying, well, we're not willing to bail out certain governments that we don't think have been operating well. So that's the kind of the fight right now between the Democrats and Republicans that is holding up any type of agreement. That, along with the extension of unemployment benefits, which you saw recently, the president decided to do that unilaterally and extend those unemployment benefits. So that's the fight that is happening in Washington, D.C. right now. We're urging them and telling them, look, small businesses, particularly hotels, are really starting to get to a point where they may not survive. And so if you could just pass the PPP that we all seem to agree on, leave all that other stuff for another day, that would be very helpful. To this point, they've not done that, but that's the fight. And technically, yes, they are out of session, but I can assure you that the staff members and many members of Congress themselves are still here in Washington, D.C., working on these issues. And so if an agreement was reached, they would come back for a vote quite quickly and get this done.
Well, I truly hope that this cause continues to move forward because, as you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that are without a job. And to get this industry back on the track, there are lots of moving parts. We've got to be able to protect the workforce. We've got to be able to protect the visitors. We have to be able to provide financial relief. So there are lots of moving parts. And I hope that lawmakers would stay focused and get this thing through, because there is a very, very tough time, and there is a carnage that is about to happen. A lot of hotels are talking about not being able to reopen ever. So I hope that the government will come back and the lawmakers will come back and extend some help. Other than the executive order the president did for the unemployment benefit, is there anything else that is being talked about, that is being debated to help the unemployed?
Well, really, that is the focus. What the president did recently, really, he did four things. Only two of them would relate to us, so I'll focus on those. You had the unemployment extension. Keep in mind that the unemployment system in the U.S. is based at the state level. So depending on what state you're in, traditionally, you're going to receive benefits based on the level of that particular state sets. So it goes from a low of maybe close to $300 in a place like Mississippi all the way up to about $1,000 a week in a place like Massachusetts. What the federal government did in the first CARES package is they said, okay, the federal government through the end of July will add an additional $600. Now, that was good and it was helpful to a lot of people, but it also in many cases provided a disincentive for some people to come back to work. I'll give you a perfect example. Well, not an example, but a study that was done. The University of Chicago looked at those folks who were receiving unemployment benefits and found that about 2/3 were actually now receiving more on unemployment than they were at the job they previously held. You can see the problem with that because we're now paying people not to work. And I would imagine everyone, Democrat, Republican, everyone can certainly agree that we don't want to be in a country where paying people not to work is preferable than them actually working. That doesn't help any of us. Yeah. And so what the president did is he came back and said, look, we're going to extend it unilaterally and offer $400 per week as opposed to the additional $600 per week on top of the state benefits. The federal government will pay $300 of that, and the state would be required to pay an additional $100. And so the state will have some investment into it as well for this bonus of $400 per week. So he did that unilaterally. The second part of that is to help employers and employees that are actually already working by suspending the collection of the payroll tax or the FICA taxes. And so he's done that. Now, it will take an act of Congress at a later date to make sure that whatever tax liability you had is actually gone. All the president can do right now legally is suspend the collection of it. But that could provide an additional stimulus to employers and employees alike to help put more money into their pockets and encourage more hiring. And so on those two things, there was success there, and we should applaud the president and his team for doing that. What we also see happening at the congressional level, in addition to the liability protection we've talked about, the additional PPP, is an area on the lending side, which is of critical importance to so many hoteliers, and that is how do we gain access to the Main Street Lending Program? Because the Main Street Lending Program was created for the purpose of giving very low interest loans with very favorable terms, non-recourse loans, to businesses that needed it to survive. Unfortunately, any business that had significant debt around real estate was kind of written out based on the rules and regulations. So consequently, there have been no hotels that have been able to gain access to the Main Street Lending Program. We believe that was a mistake. We've said that loud and clear, and we believe we're going to get a correction there, hopefully, so that hotels can gain access to those low interest loans. And then the final thing I'll say is there's legislation that we have supported on a bipartisan basis, working its way through Congress, that deals with the CMBS problem, the commercial mortgage-backed security problem, where we now see that well over 25% of hotels that have a CMBS loan have fallen into delinquency. And those loans will soon fall into default, which would mean foreclosure in many cases. We don't want that to happen. That's going to cause a spiral downward of hotel values across the country. And so we're trying to prevent that from happening by creating a mechanism where those owners can gain access to funds to help pay their CMBS loans. So there's still a lot of things that are happening out there. We're not going to win all of them. I will tell you of a victory we had just today, which is really good news. We had urged Congress to introduce bipartisan legislation, and it happened, to urge the General Services Administration to freeze the per diem rates moving forward for the next year. This is critically important because government travel and per diem rates fluctuate based on the current environment of rates and things like that. So they were able to lock it in for next year at the same rates of 2020, which is fantastic because many other businesses also set their rates based on the government per diem rates. So that was a big victory for us that just happened today.
Oh, fantastic. I'm sure that would help because at this particular point, typically in the industry, when the demand goes down, the rates go down, and it's just a downward spiral that hurts the markets in general. So great victory. Thank you for making that happen. I'm going to continue to talk about the COVID for a little bit. We definitely want to spend time looking beyond COVID, and hopefully that'll happen sooner than later. And I'll turn it over to Sam in a bit. But any news on the travel tax credit? Is that moving forward? Is that stalled?
It's definitely stalled. If there's one of our priorities that is not moving at this time, it's probably the travel tax credit. And the reason why is lawmakers are looking at the problem that we're in right now and saying to themselves and saying to others, why would we encourage travel at a time when we actually don't want people spreading the virus? And so even despite our best efforts of saying, no, it's very safe to stay in a hotel, it's very safe to travel in many places, lawmakers are a little wary of this idea of saying, hey, let's get everybody out traveling right now. So in large part, most agree there needs to be a travel tax credit. In the bill that was introduced in the Senate, the HEALS Act, there was language in there, at least for restoring 100% deductibility on business meals, and that was certainly helpful on business expenses and travel expenses related to business. But we don't expect that's going to ultimately be in whatever agreement they come to here in the short term. Once we get to therapies and a vaccine, there will be a great need to encourage people financially, encourage them to begin traveling again. And I think at that time, you're going to see a much better reception on this idea of travel tax credits. So the idea is out there. There's general approval of it. It's just a matter of timing at this point.
Fair enough. I guess even the businesses that have some sort of a travel, whether it stimulates additional demand or not, everybody's in a bit of a survival mode. And our industry, hotel industry, tends to be a bit of a derivative industry. Everybody else has to do well before we can do well, because we welcome all business people, we welcome leisure travelers, but people have to have a means to come to our hotels. So this definitely will help whenever it gets kicked in. I think it would definitely help. Any news on business interruption insurance? I know that has been a huge debate, and for a lot of owners, it came as a surprise that their policies did not cover the current pandemic. Is there anything that has developed through lawmakers? Is that even on their radar at this point? Or where does that stand?
It is. In fact, even at the highest levels, we just had a conversation on one of our webinars recently with Speaker Pelosi, and she's quite familiar with this, and the leadership on the Senate side is familiar with it as well. And the good thing is we already have a model in place. Because of what happened after 9/11, there was a law created called TRIA, Terrorism Risk Insurance, and it effectively allows businesses to buy subsidized coverage for terror if an act of terror was to disrupt their business. We believe the same thing is going to happen, and there's already legislation being considered to this effect for creating what's known as PRIA, which would be pandemic risk insurance. And so if we can create something like that where the government is the ultimate backstop and businesses are able to buy insurance at a reasonable rate to cover themselves for the next pandemic, if in fact there is another pandemic, hopefully there won't be.
Yeah.
And if it happens every 100 years, I guess we'll have to live with that. But if that happens, they would be covered in the same way that they're covered under terrorism risk right now.
Oh, that would be great, because quite candidly, particularly in the restaurant world, that would have helped them a lot. But I guess it's not going to be retroactive. At least we would cover the future, because for a lot of people, even if the policies were written in a way that this should be covered, insurance companies are sort of trying to deny the claims. So hopefully that'll work out. I know liability issues, you briefly touched on that earlier, for hotel owners and operators or restaurant operators and owners. There is a lot of concern that if the consumers claims that they have been infected because they visited the establishment, what kind of liability comes back, or is there a waiver? Has that been discussed, or has there been any development on that front?
A lot of development on this one. So that has been the top priority all along for Majority Leader McConnell in the Senate, and we have certainly supported that position. There's no question about it. He has held the line on that. We're very thankful for that, very supportive of him for that. Because that is not something that the House of Representatives really wants, and they of course did not include it in their original HEROES Act. And so that is still on the table to provide a 6-year coverage on making sure that you're not, as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do, that you can't be held liable for someone making the claim. And I want to point this out. This is really critical. And this is what I talk to lawmakers about all the time. It's not necessarily the actual lawsuit that gets litigated that hotel owners and business owners are worried about. Because the reality is, as you just pointed out, someone will have a very difficult time proving in a court of law that they contacted the coronavirus in a hotel or any specific business. That's going to be very, very difficult to prove. But what we know actually happens is that there's a cottage industry of plaintiffs' attorneys, and we see this with other laws like the ADA, where they will just simply send a letter, a threatening letter saying, look, we have a claim against you. If you pay me X amount of dollars, we'll just make it go away. That is a common practice. It's a shady practice. It's frankly, in many ways, disgusting that they're able to get away with it. But we can certainly see that happening in this situation. Massive amounts of letters going out to these small business owners saying, hey, we have a client who may have caught the COVID virus at your hotel. If you'll give us $7,000, we won't proceed forward with a lawsuit. And unfortunately, the small business owner is faced with either hiring an attorney that probably costs more than $7,000 or $8,000, or just paying the ransom, effectively that's what it is, to the plaintiff's attorney who's making the threat. We don't need to be in that position. Hotel owners don't need to be in that position. That's why this type of liability protection is so important. Now, the good news is that we're not fighting this only at the federal level. We're also fighting this at the state level. And just this last week, the 11th state signed a measure into law through either through the normal legislative process or through executive order. The state of Nevada added liability protection as well. So we now have 11 states across the U.S. who have said that this is their state policy, and so you wouldn't be able to have those cases in state court. We still need a federal answer, but at least in those 11 states, you have a system that is set up to help protect you from these frivolous lawsuits.
If my memory serves me correctly, the last state to enact that was Georgia, I believe, just last week. They signed it into law. So at least that one particular jurisdiction is protected as of a week ago.
Yeah, Georgia did last week, and they became the largest state population-wise to sign into the law. And the governor there happens to be somebody I know quite well, and we certainly send kudos to Governor Kemp and his team for doing that. Nevada actually, since that time, has signed it into law as well. And so they're actually the latest state, and then that brings the total up to 11.
Oh, superb. So it's great that that's moving forward. And you're absolutely correct that it will definitely start a new business line of these lawyers just being totally unethical. But unfortunately, that's the world that we live in. The labor unions, I know there were a couple of issues that came out on West Coast, but how do you see their role? Are they standing by the hotel industry because their members rely on this industry thriving? Do you have any thoughts on that? Any conversations that you might have been involved in recently as to how they can help us move the agenda forward so that the hotels can start to reopen and welcome the guests?
Well, it's very unfortunate. You would think at a time like this, something that we've never seen before, really in our nation's history, where our entire economy has been brought to a grinding halt. You had the gross domestic product in the second quarter drop by 30-some-odd%. That's never been seen before. Millions of people out of work. The hotel industry facing an unemployment rate of in excess of 40%. You would think at a time like this that everyone could set aside their normal, what I would often characterize as petty grievances, and say, look, we should all work together to find solutions to keep everyone afloat, the business afloat and the employees afloat, because without the business, there are no jobs to come back to. You would think, again, that at this time we could all do that. Unfortunately, that has not been the case with many of our unions. Now, I shouldn't say all unions are behaving in that way. We heard recently that an agreement was reached in the city of Boston that was quite reasonable, that helps both employees and the businesses stay afloat. But then you look at a place like San Francisco, and it's almost reprehensible the position the Board of Supervisors have taken there. Not only are they doing the bidding of organized labor in a way that I would argue, if their constituents knew about it, they should be thrown out of office quickly, because they're not representing their constituents, they're representing a single interest group. But even more concerning is the fact that the policies that they are placing on hotels actually put guests and employees in more danger. These are not policies that the CDC recommends. These are not policies that even Cal OSHA recommends. These are not policies that the City of San Francisco Health Board recommends. These are policies that are driven only by organized labor, Unite here in that particular case in San Francisco, that are designed to create jobs and unfortunately have the effect of destroying jobs. Because what's happening in San Francisco is that hotels that were open, some of them are closing. Those that were closed and not yet reopened are not going to open. So they're hurting their own members. They're hurting the industry. And in those rare instances where these policies are being put in place because the hotel actually remains open, they're actually putting guests and employees at risk. And so, again, I go back to my premise that at a time like this, we should all be working together. we on the industry side certainly hold out a hand of support to employees across the board. Almost everything we do is designed to help employees. And if they would just meet us, not even halfway, just meet us 20%, we could all work together and get something done. But these policies that are designed to hurt businesses for the sole purpose of hurting businesses, and at the same time have the ancillary effects of hurting guests and employees, are extremely dangerous. And these are things that should be rejected out of hand by any reasonable lawmaker. Unfortunately, there are some unreasonable lawmakers in certain places that have looked at these ideas and have adopted them, even when science, ethics, and economics tell us otherwise.
Well, that is really, really, really unfortunate because, quite candidly, as you have said, if the business model does not work, there will not be any employees. And the labor unions' memberships are hurt, but more importantly, the employees are hurt because they're out of work. So that's really unfortunate. I hope that our viewers and your talks that you've been having, people can get to understand it better and stand beside the industry so that there will be more jobs created.
Let me give you two examples on that, just to make that point. And one example will be logical to everyone above the age of, say, 25, and the other one will be a good example for everyone above the age of 50. You know how many people work for Blockbuster Video today? Zero, because the company doesn't exist anymore. The last one just closed this week. But an even better example of that is, do you know how many people work for Eastern Airlines? If you recall Eastern, that's if you're age 50 and above, you probably recall Eastern Airlines was a legitimate national operator back in the 1970s. And their union wanted things that were unsustainable to keep the business in operation. And Eastern Airlines folded specifically because all their pilots went on a strike. And today, you know how many people work for Eastern Airlines? Zero. Nobody works for that company because the company is gone. We certainly don't want to see that at hotels across the country.
Well, this industry is one of the largest employers at all different levels of skill sets that we attract. It is a terrific industry on many different fronts, and I truly hope that we will be able to come back before too long. We might come back a little bruised and a little beat up, but I think the industry is resilient enough where if everybody works together, we will be able to come back. Chip, I'm going to change gears, if you don't mind, to look beyond COVID. And again, I'll keep my fingers crossed and all the work that you're doing and everybody else that is involved in public health system that we will get a handle on this before too long. But in the consumer journey, there are lots of touch points that we have to get build their confidence, whether it is getting into an Uber, going to an airport, sitting in an airplane, hotel, restaurants. How do we combine forces to get that confidence level up, that the industry collectively is doing everything we can to keep everybody safe?
That is as they used to say back in the day, the $64,000 question. And it is one that I think we've handled about as well as we could, but put yourself in the mindset of a consumer. And at this point in time, the average consumer of hotels is someone that is we would characterize as a leisure traveler. There's not a lot of business travel going on. There's certainly not a lot of meetings and conventions. So if you're a leisure traveler, what is that you want to do when you visit another city, and how do you make that happen? Well, you have to probably get in an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi cab or a train or drive yourself to the airport. So if you're getting into one of those cars, you need to make sure that that's safe and clean. Then you're going to get into an airplane and go through an airport. You want to make sure that that's safe and clean. Then you're going to get to a hotel that you want to be safe and clean. And then you're going to want to experience the things that you would typically experience on any given trip. So if you think about that, the line that is created there, the linkage that is created there for all those things. Our friends at Uber and Lyft have done a fantastic job in making. I was in a Lyft yesterday for an hour heading to the airport. You have to wear a mask. That's good. And they're wiping down and cleaning everything. That's wonderful. And they're projecting that message. I got into the airplane yesterday, and it was fantastic. Everybody had to wear masks, which is good. But they came on the loudspeaker and they said, our air is circulated every 3 minutes and it's 99.99% pure to kill all bacteria. So as a consumer, I'm saying, good, I feel safe and clean on this airplane. That's wonderful. And then I get in that Uber or Lyft once I land and I get to the hotel and I know that hotel has adopted Safe Stay and that's safe and clean. But here's the rub, and I was talking to some folks recently about this. Even if you feel safe and clean through all of that, if you're wanting to go to a local restaurant or a local museum or something like that, and that business is now shut down because of the economic impact of COVID, you may not ultimately take that trip. So even if we as an industry work with other industries and we get it 100% right on the cleaning and safety, and I think we're awful close to getting it 100% right on the cleaning and safety, even with all that, if on the other end of that arrival, those businesses and those museums and those restaurants are closed down, we're still stifling travel, which is why it's so important to have these economic measures coming from Congress to help keep those businesses alive, to help keep our friends in the restaurant industry alive so that people can fully enjoy those leisure trips that they want to take. Yes, they're still going to the beach. Yes, they're still going to the mountains and hiking and everything, and boating, and all of that is wonderful. Just saw a report today that said that boat rentals are at all-time highs. That's fantastic. RV rentals are at all-time highs. Traveling is good. But if we're going to survive this long term, we need to get back to the entire ecosphere of traveling being able to flourish and do well.
Absolutely. Very well said. Our industry in the entire travel ecosystem almost needs to have a relaunch so the consumer feels comfortable. There is disposable income with consumers that they are able to travel. In immediate terms, at least, all the travel professionals have been talking about the leisure travel is going to bounce back quicker, and that's where the demand exists today. But hopefully we will get the business travel to come back. Let me, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to Sam for a couple of minutes, and then I'll come right back to you. Sam, over to you.
Thank you very much. I had two questions. In fact, there's one of the viewers, a hotelier based in the Midwest, who asked me to ask you these questions about the COVID-19 hospitality. Has AH&LA compiled a list of best practices from its members regarding marketing, operations, risk management, HR, and financial planning? He says, we learn best from others who succeed. So any thoughts on this? What is AH&LA doing in compiling the list and then to assisting the members with these kind of information?
Great question. It is an evolving process. And as we work through this, it's always important to keep in mind that different hotels are at different places, kind of along this road to recovery, as we call it. Those who are really just trying to hang on, to those that maybe in a beach market that have already found themselves in a pretty good spot, and they're out there actively pursuing consumers and marketing their hotel as a place for vacation. And so all along that road, there are people in different places, and our best practices are aligned to each one of them. It is safe to say that we've been mainly focused on the safety and cleanliness best practices, and you'll find that in the Safe Stay guidelines. I'm proud to say we've had about 70,000 downloads of our Safe Stay guidelines so far. It's free on our website. You're more than welcome to do it. We have free signage and things like that there as well. Some of the other best practices, we're not there yet. We're still evolving into that, but over time we will certainly have that and post that and distribute that to anyone that is a member, and you can hopefully use those best practices to survive. I will tell you this, my own one recommendation that I've given to hoteliers across the board, this is going all the way back to March, and most people know this. The single biggest challenge that hotels are facing right now is the ability to make their debt payments so that they can stay in business. Do not wait too long. You've got to communicate with your lender. It doesn't matter what type of lender it is. Communicate early and often with your lender. Let them know your situation. If you don't, number one, their resources may be tied up with others. And number two, you may just get to a point where they can't help you anymore. And so if I had one piece of advice, best practice for every hotelier that is watching this, who knows that they're going to need some sort of flexibility or forbearance with their outstanding debt, talk to your lender early and talk to them often and be very honest about where you are and where you're going to be in the next few months.
Excellent. I'm going to now address more of a global issue, and because I think it affects not only underdeveloped countries but developed countries. It is relating to human trafficking. and it's a massive violation of human rights and where migrants are most vulnerable. I understand you have a program called No Room for Trafficking. What is being done to educate hotels in identifying traffickers and potential victims in the hotel?
That is, if you asked me as was asked at the beginning of this, what were we planning for in 2020? It was really a massive expansion of our No Room for Trafficking campaign, which, by the way, I'm proud to say just this week, PR Week magazine came out and they release each year they give out these awards for those campaigns that are making a positive impact on the world. And there's a number of categories. It's kind of like the Oscars for campaigns. We actually got nominated because of our No Room for Trafficking campaign for 3 different awards. We were the only organization and or company to get nominated for 3 different awards. They're called Purpose Awards. And our purpose is to eradicate human trafficking as we know it in the U.S. and specifically in the hotel industry. And we began that a couple of years ago. We've had great success with it. We do offer free training to hotel employees, free signage, and we spend so many hours every week trying to promote this. Now, a lot of it has sadly taken a back seat during the pandemic as hotels try to survive. But I can promise you for the long term, and probably as long as I'm around this place, we will continue to push this idea that hotels are the last place anyone ever wants to go to traffic another human being. We need to do our part to get rid of it once and for all. It's nice to see that this message has been picked up by others. I just saw recently, I know he's a somewhat popular national figure and athlete that works on a lot of good causes, but Tim Tebow recently came out and made this one of his top priorities that his foundation is working on, is to stop human trafficking. And when we can get people like that with voices into other areas to really promote wonderful things like stopping human trafficking, then we know we're making a difference. And so we will continue to push forward on this. If we can eradicate it here in the U.S., it will eliminate a lot of the demand and prevent it from coming in from other countries and stop it in those host countries as well. And so it's an important issue as we all think about the challenges that we face each and every day. The notion that you or a loved one were to be trafficked is probably the most disgusting thing that you can think of, and one that we would go to great lengths to help prevent. And we're trying to do that in our industry.
Thank you. I can hear that you're very passionate about this topic. So let me turn over now back to Abid.
I neglected to congratulate you and your team, Chip. I had read about the Purpose Awards, a fabulous work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is terrific, and particularly on a cause that is very important globally, but certainly for U.S. Sustainability has been another topic, and I know with COVID, unfortunately, most of everything has gone to the back burner because we are in survival mode. But we looking beyond COVID at this particular point, sustainability, unfortunately, might have taken a hit because while everybody was taking out single-use bottles and doing some other stuff, COVID has brought all that back. Any thoughts on that? Any work as we come out of COVID? Any work that will be planned or was planned by AH&LA?
Well, I think we'll quickly revert back to those sustainability measures once you move out of COVID. I mean, if you're looking for silver linings, and this is a tough one to accept, but the reality is so few people are staying in hotels right now that the kind of the impact of those plastics and other things are quite diminished compared to where they were this time last year. So that is somewhat of a silver lining, but we also need to make sure we're committing ourselves that once we do return to normal times, that we continue to adopt and progress in those areas that we know are going to have a positive impact, and sustainability is clearly one of those. So I think the industry is completely bought in on this idea, and once normal times return, you'll see many of those programs and policies continue to be put in place and to be executed upon. But right now, everything, as you indicated, has taken a backseat to COVID.
Yep. Another thing that has been with the lawmakers for a little while, and it has been debated forever, but immigration reforms or visitor visa conditions that have been put into place. I know industry has been very vocal in relaxing some of the visitor visa requirements and or immigration issues so that they can get the right people. Now, the unfortunate thing is today we got far more people that are looking for work, but it wasn't all but maybe 10 months ago that we were very short of labor. Any thoughts on that? Do you think it'll come back on the radar before too long?
You make a good point. February of this year, which wasn't really that long ago, our industry had 900,000 job openings. So 900,000 jobs existed in the hotel industry that could not be filled. We certainly don't have that problem now with a hotel unemployment rate of in excess of 40%, as millions of people are looking for work. I don't think that the immigration issue is going to solve itself until after the election, and it really depends on what happens in the election. We're not sure, and even for some time after that. As we think about the policies that have been put in place, even in our own country, where if you live in certain states, you're not allowed to travel to New York or New Jersey without quarantining. I don't suspect there will be a large appetite of bringing in too many international visitors until such time as we're past the pandemic. But as we look at where we are going in the years ahead, I think it's important to remember as a global community, the more we can really, and I've always held this view, export the goodness of the United States around the world, then we find ourselves in a much better position of negotiating and working with our global partners. You know, there's a really interesting stat out there that we used in helping to pass Brand USA not too long ago that talked about the views that non-Americans have of the United States, and those views, how they look if they've been to the U.S. and how they look if they've never been to the U.S. And so a visitor who has never been to the U.S. has a favorability rating of the U.S. in the 20% range, somewhere between 20 and 30%. For those that have visited the U.S., their favorable view of the U.S. is somewhere between 70 and 80%. The
Wow.
Same thing holds for workers. So if we had a guest worker program, particularly in the hospitality industry, that allows people to come here and experience what I like to call the greatness of the United States and the warmth of our people, and just have this experience, and yet they at some point will go home to their host country, the message of how good the U.S. is gets spread without us having to do anything other than expose people to what we have here. And so I think over the long term, hopefully we will all come to that conclusion that it is a good thing. But in the short term, for both politics and pandemic reasons, I don't think we're going to see much movement on that issue.
Fair enough. I have always said, and being in the industry for a very long time, I wish more people are able to travel and experience different cultures, particularly U.S. It's a fabulous destination to visit, and there's so much to offer. But if more people could experience different countries, different cultures, I think as human beings we'll be a lot more accepting of differences, and the world would be a much better place. Chip,
you know, it's interesting you say that. Dr. Milton Friedman, somebody that I followed quite closely, he's no longer with us, but one of America's greatest economists, used to have this simple phrase that you don't often go to war with your trading partners. And if we look at travel in many ways, and it's characterized this way according to the federal government as trade, it's actually characterized as in imports and exports. If we look at it that way, and those that we exchange travel with, we're much less likely to get into a fight with. It's not always going to be the case, but it's that human understanding of someone else's position because you've been there, you've felt that, you've experienced it, that gives you the ability to be able to negotiate and work with each other peacefully, that I think is a benefit to travel, and it's something we should continue to promote.
I think this industry is a fantastic industry, quite candidly, to expose people from different backgrounds to different cultures. I've loved it. I've been very fortunate, as has Sam, to have been able to live abroad and work in different countries. I think human beings generally are superb creatures, and everybody is very warm and welcoming. And if we can understand each other better, we are far better off than not. Chip, I must congratulate you again. I think the one way to gain confidence of the consumer and traveling public is communication, communication, communication. And I know you have been asked by lots of people to come and speak, and thank you for making time to participate in hospitality talks, but also all that you do to make sure that the owners are protected, our industry is protected, and the consumer will get to hear from you directly, and hopefully their confidence goes up. So thank you very much for doing that. Last question, I promise, because I've kept you here very long. What can we do, people like myself that have been in the industry, love the industry, unfortunately or fortunately, some of us have a better time on our hand. How can we volunteer to help all the work that you're doing to help the industry? Anything we can do to help?
The easiest, well, first, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been enjoyable, and I hope everyone watching has learned a few things, and I just appreciate your time. The single easiest thing to do for anyone watching me that is involved in our industry is to sign up for Hotels Act. It is free. I want to point that out, free. It will cost you nothing. It takes about 30 or 60 seconds to sign up for it. And what this is our grassroots effort to communicate to elected officials. And it works very simple. You put in your name, your address, so that we know what congressional district you're living in, and even state house and state senate district. And then when we have an issue that's really important for your local area or at the federal government, what we do is we'll send you a letter, and it will say, support these, 2 or 3 things to support the hotel industry. And all you have to do is click yes, and it will automatically send it to your elected officials in your name. And that is so critical. Since the pandemic started, we've been able to generate over 175,000 letters to members of Congress using this system. Having that type of grassroots engagement is the key to us being successful. So anybody that's watching me right now, if you just go to Hotels Act, that's hotelsact.org. It's free, it's quick, and you can really be doing a lot to help our industry. So, gentlemen, thanks for your time today, and I appreciate being on the show.
Well, thank you for making the time. I'm sure our viewers will gain a lot out of it. I have gained a lot out of it, a much better understanding as to how things are progressing on the Capitol Hill. Chip, again, can't say enough. Thanks for all that you do to protect our industry. And thanks for being with us. Sam, over to you.
Well, I just want to mention that early on in my career, I spent one of my best years in U.S. as being a management trainee for a company, and one of the best friends I have still are, besides Abid, of course, are from the time in U.S. So I really share the sentiment of that. If you never visited the U.S., you truly don't understand how it is really like, and I think it's worthwhile to spend the time, and those friendships are golden and valuable to me. So I just want to mention this in this broadcast. So
welcome back anytime.
Thank you. And we would like to thank all the viewers who have joined us, all the live viewers, and of course all the repeat viewers who will be watching this broadcast on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we will continue with our broadcasting, and we will look forward to welcome everyone to join the future broadcast with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.